Good afternoon. Thanks for the introduction. That's now my third presentation today, and it's the only one that's not at the end of the session. I'd like to talk a little bit about the ancillary service market in Germany. Mainly it is a reserve market, but also the others a little bit. You've probably seen a lot already about the German power system, so I don't go through the numbers itself. Just it's a lot of wind and solar installed, biomass as well. And I like to show this picture here, which is from a Sunday this year in July. That is July 30. And there is this point I would like to draw your attention on. There you can see the red light is the load. And from the bottom up, we have biomass, hydro, wind, onshore and offshore, and solar PV. And you see there's only a little left. This is not covered from these renewables. And not just renewables, but variable renewables, distributed renewables. And there are still some units running, conventional units on top of this. They're just exporting. So everything above the red line is export to the neighboring countries, and that's the advantage in Germany, that we have about between 12 and 15 gigawatts of exporting capacity, transmission capacity to the neighbors. Unfortunately, at these times of especially with a high wind share, this capacity is reduced due to grid constraints within Germany. But anyway, it helps, so we have still conventional units running. But you can imagine what happens if we install even more wind and PV. So there must be different ways to provide ancillary services, because not everything can be provided anymore with conventional reserves, conventional generation. There might be no conventional generation online anymore. And that's why we have to think about alternatives there. But this presentation is also about the ancillary service markets and ancillary services in general. So for the system operation, we have different services that are running in different criteria and parameters. I'd like to focus on the ancillary services in the middle of this picture. From a market point of view, there's mainly the frequency control. That's the really interesting part, because voltage control and the other system restoration is nothing that you can actually done via the market, via a free market. It might be a regulated market, yeah, but not a free market. So voltage control has to be on one specific point. So there is a monopoly, and a national monopoly. There is no free market running. System restoration as well is now completely organized differently without the renewables, as we still have enough conventional capacity to do this. But the frequency control, this is a real market, and a little difference in the organization towards the MISO or the North American markets is there. We have a frequency containment reserve and the frequency restoration reserve. And then there's the reserve replacement. This is another thing. The frequency containment reserve used to be called primary reserve. And the main requirement is that it needs to start within 5 seconds in the right direction. And when the frequency drops or increases, after 5 seconds, this reserve has to move, and after 30 seconds, according to the frequency deviation, it has to be on full power. There is no requirements that is already online, that is spinning or whatever. It is only that requirement about the time. It can be a load, it can be a battery, it can be a dispatchable load, it can be a generation, whatever it is. And if you have a generation that is fast enough to start within 30 seconds, fine. So in frequency restoration reserve, we have the manual and the automatic frequency restoration reserve, and that's the automatic needs to start after 30 seconds and completely available after 5 minutes. And the manual or tertiary reserve then is after 15 minutes has to be available. So this is a little different in the organization of the market. There's no technical requirements of how you provide it. There's a technical pre-qualification. So whenever you want to offer this, you need to show and to prove, also with a test, that your equipment is able to do so, but no really requirement how to provide it. Just a question that you provided. So I go a little bit into frequency control and in the market, how it works there. These are the three picture of the three different ways. So if the frequency drops at the top, there is the frequency curve. If it drops for whatever reason, first we have inertia there, but this is implemented. There is no market for this, and then the frequency containment reserve, or former known as primary reserve, comes up based on the linear to the frequency deviation. And then it is fully available after 30 seconds, so then the frequency does not drop any further. Then after 30 seconds, the green one here, the automatic frequency restoration reserve, that comes up, that brings back the frequency to 250 hertz. It can be faster. Usually it is faster. Most of the AFRR is hydropower, so it's within half a minute or within a minute it's back, the frequency is back. But anyway, that's the requirement. And then we have the manual frequency reserve that just replaces the automatic one. But this is on the decision of the control room staff. They know we have a power plant outage, for example, that will last for a longer time. We know that's just the change of the schedule, so the deviation will go away after 5 minutes, so we don't need to start the manual reserves there. And then after 1 hour, usually the balancing responsible party, the one who caused the deviation there, the imbalance, is responsible to take care of it by himself, by bilateral contracts, by balancing energy that this party buys on the power market, on the energy market. So how to calculate the reserves and the amount of reserves that we need? That's the next question here. There's for the primary reserve, or for the FCR, frequency containment reserve. There's a rule of thumb, more or less, within all Europe. We have the largest unit of about 1,500 megawatts, and we say, well, 2 of these large units we might lose, so it's an N-2 criteria, and we still want to keep the frequency in a stable range in this case. And so there's an agreement in the central part of Europe, so in the synchronous area of Central Europe, that 3 gigawatts is enough, and these 3 gigawatts are shared by all the TSOs based on their loads. I think Germany covers about 25% of these, because it has 25% of the load in this synchronous area. Yeah. And the other reserves are a different way to calculate. I'll come to this later. The secondary reserve and the total reserve, then we calculate based on the following criteria. There's some noise around the load that is usually covered by secondary reserve, and that's why we need this for calculating secondary and total. Then there's the forecast error. There's also forecast error of the renewables goes in there. At least that what is not balanced by other intraday market, real-time market measures. So this goes into the total reserve because these errors are so slow because of the large area and the wide distribution of the renewables. So it is not fast changing or fast acting forecast errors there. So we can use this in the total reserves. It's nothing for the secondary reserve. Schedule steps is a thing that is actually not necessary, but it happens. So every hour we have a schedule change. So some power plants get out of service, some comes in, and there are some of them get out faster than the others comes in, or the way around. So we have a frequency deviation at every full hour, which is not very helpful, and which is a negative effect of the liberalization and IPPs, because they are not coordinated anymore. They just ramp down at the end of the hour, and the other ones ramp up, and this is not a coordinated procedure, so there is a frequency deviation. And this is, of course, handled by automatic FRR, so secondary reserve. Power plant outages, it's clear, can happen all the time. And then hourly steps of forecast error and 15-minute steps of forecast error. So the market runs on 15 minutes or on hourly base, depending on which market it is. So there's also a little different load is increasing constantly, and then every 15 minutes or every hour there's a step in generation, so you have this deviation there. For the calculation, there are different values used. One is a frequency distribution of load forecast errors. That's the largest part and the most important part. What the German TSOs do there is just draw this line. Independent of this, uncorrelated, there is the frequency distribution of power plant outages. There's of course only positive, because only positive reserves is needed there. And then you do a convolution mathematical method. You can do this because they are uncorrelated, these two events or these two distributions. And then you get out a result there, and I zoom into this. This is the resulting requirement or resulting need for reserves as a frequency distribution. And then another assumption is that we like to cover 99.8% of the time with reserves. You never can cover 100% because then you end up with only reserves and nothing else. So we accept an area under this curve of 0.1% on each side that is not covered. And in this case, we are relying on the neighboring countries, on the neighboring control areas, or in an extreme situation, it would be load shedding there, but it's never happened so far. So and then you have the total reserve capacity calculated there, and this is just an example here. That's not a German system, so we need much more than 600 megawatts there. But I'm not allowed to show the real values, so I just show this as an example. Therein is the primary reserve and secondary reserve and tertiary reserve altogether. You can actually download the values that were scheduled and were tendered of reserves from the internet. And if you look at this this is just 1 year here, but if you look at this for many years, for the last 10 years or last 5 years, you will find that even with increasing renewables, there is no more reserves needed at this point, because these reserves cover only the fast-acting or fast-needed reserves. And the renewables, as they are so spread out all over the country, they need quite some backup. Then they have forecast errors and so on. But this is mainly covered in the market, in the real-time market, in the intraday market, and not with reserves because it's not so fast. So what you need here is only the forecast error of an hour ahead or half an hour ahead. The three specifications I listed here in this table again. That's primary control, secondary control, and tertiary, so FCR, automatic FRR, and manual FRR. The auction time for the first two is weekly. So the tertiary control is daily auctioned. Auction means that the TSOs calculate how much they need, and they do the auction and ask for tenders, and ask for offers, and buy the reserves on this tendering base, on this auction base, for primary control for a whole week, plus and minus, and there's only symmetrical, so when you offer both negative and positive, minimum of 1 megawatt. So even smaller system can bid in, but then they have to do some pooling, and it's only paid a capacity price because the energy at the end is zero. Frequency in average is 50 hertz, so there is no energy at the end. And then secondary and tertiary control is separated in positive and negative. The minimum is 55 megawatts. That's because of practical reason, otherwise, because you need to communicate between the control room and the reserves. So that's not possible with smaller systems. And there is a capacity price, so the cheapest one gets first. And then there's, when they are called by the control room, there is an energy price. And this energy price then is charged to the balancing groups who were causing the imbalance, but the capacity price is paid on the grid fees. And yeah, what else? I listed a few influences here. We extended the control rooms recently, which helped to reduce the need for market for reserves. Optimization of at the bottom there, optimization of the forecast, of course, reducing it. Growing of renewables, increasing it, but with the optimization of the forecast, it is reduced. So in total, it was reduced over the last years. I don't want to go into details here. Voltage control, that's another ancillary services, ancillary service. The problem is it is not a real market possible. At some areas we try this, to buy these voltage controls, in fact reactive power, that there is an open market because it's so locally needed that it is it doesn't work in this case. Yeah, the market size is limited, and the sources are limited as well. So you cannot transport reactive power over a large area. Nevertheless, it's paid sometimes, but then the price is set by the regulator. So it's kind of a market-based success, but the price is set by the regulator. So because of the monopoly of this might be single power plant, which is responsible for one area there. I have a little outlook here, how to provide these renewables with how to provide the ancillary services with renewables. In this case, the frequency and voltage control. There's a whole session tomorrow morning about this. It's session 9C. Is that right, Thomas? I think it's 9C. About how to provide renewables with how to provide an ancillary services for renewables. Here is the result from a research project that we did a few years ago. And what you see is there's a big difference between wind and solar. It's not because of the technology, it's because of the size of the units. So if you want to provide reserves with 5 kilowatt rooftop systems, PV systems, it's very difficult. It is technically, of course, possible, but it's very difficult just from the practical point of view. And so it's that's why we decided on this project, on this research project. Well, with large wind farms, it's possible. With large, not written yet. We just starting in Germany with wind power, taking part in the reserve market, but there is probably still no real need so far for it, because we still have enough conventional units running. But in the future, we will need to change this and need to take. However, with more PV and wind online, we will need them to provide the services, voltage as well as frequency control. Questions now or later?
Derek can take some questions now.
Okay.
Nick Miller, GE, US. Oh, this is nasty. Question and a comment for you, Bernie, and maybe it spills over to Durgesh. For the reserve restoration service, which we would call REG in the US, our regulator, FERC, a few years ago determined that the sort of prescriptive you shall respond in that ramp fashion that you showed in your diagram was under-rewarding resources that could respond faster. So there's no economic motivation for a resource that could help restoration more quickly to do so because they didn't get any benefit. And FERC decided that that was a market flaw and mandated that, I think the vernacular for it is pay for performance, that resources that could respond faster be paid better. And I guess the question is there any sort of pay for performance type structure being considered in Germany and the other European ancillary services? And then while I still got the floor, it's a question for Durgesh. Is the pay for performance maybe part of the reason, because that was certainly the intent of the regulation, that MISO was able to go from 1,600 to 400 megawatts of REG? Thanks.
Me first. Okay, as far as I know, there is no incentive for being faster than this requirement. This is the requirement. There's just an incentive to really meet this requirement. If not, if you do not meet it for several times, you get out of the business. You're not allowed to participate in the tender anymore. But well, it's just not needed. Let's say it like this. It's fast enough, and if you shorten it for some reason, then you decrease the liquidity of your market, of your reserve market. So it's but usually they are faster because the technology is just there. Many of them are hydro power plants, and they're just following the signal right away and not waiting for anything. And there's no costs connected with them following faster for the hydropower. For the thermal plants, it's different. Yeah.
So Nick, I guess maybe you can speak a little bit later in private, but I think there is there might be an open docket right now. We had started looking at like a fast frequency response type service through the stakeholder process. I mean, MISO unilaterally doesn't do anything. However, it got into some rough waters, and I think it ended up at FERC. And I think the docket is still open, so maybe the less I say, the better.
Wasn't it that the PJM had also opened up the FFR market, fast frequency regulation market, and that opened up the battery
Battery, yeah.
responding faster?
Right.
And I thought that there was also an opinion that a fast frequency response is 6 times more effective than an ancillary things and perk things. So, relating back to the question that he had said, isn't that a benefit that a benefit that is seen in Germany too, that a faster responding thing is better in terms of the system reducing the system cost?
You know, the system is so large, has so much inertia. It's different in Ireland, for example, where you have a real inertia issue. But in the Central Europe, in the synchronous area, it is not an issue. It's fast enough what we have there.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Dr. Erst.